Good evening. It's now 6:30, and I call the regular meeting of the Victoria City Council to order. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda this evening is announcements. The annual Truth in Taxation budget hearing has been scheduled for 6:30 p.m. on Monday, December 9th. This meeting will provide an opportunity for formal public input regarding the proposed budget and levy for the year 2025. We encourage and invite you to submit your comments as we prepare our budget. Your contributions are greatly valued. In other announcements, our city will host our annual winter lighting event. We cordially invite all community members to join us on Thursday, December 5th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at Bayfront Plaza to light up Victoria. We look forward to seeing you all there. That concludes our announcements this evening. The next item on our agenda is, the next order of business is to adopt the final agenda. Council, can I get a motion to adopt the final agenda?
Motion to adopt the final agenda.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We move on to our next item, which is open forum. This is the opportunity for anyone to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda, and not in application form that will be coming to the council at a future date. Council members may ask clarifying questions, but we don't typically engage in discussion during open forum. We have one individual who's registered in advance to speak this evening, and that is Mr. Christopher Keppel. Mr. Keppel, please step forward to the podium. I'm going to ask our city clerk to set the timer for 5 minutes. And before you address the council, please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, my name is Chris Keppel, Keppel. I live at 6377 Smithtown Road.
Thank you. Then you have the floor for the next 5 minutes.
Okay. So let me start by saying that I've sent this letter to all the city council and the mayor. I certainly didn't send it to the attorney. But I think everybody has it. I just want to read it into the record. I want to preface it by saying that it seems to me that one of the most important purposes of having a city is the zoning and the enforcement of various building codes. I think it's important because if you don't enforce these things, if you don't have a vision for your own city that you're willing to stand behind, poorly stated, I guess, we could evolve into Mount. I love Victoria. I've lived here for 15 years. We raised our family in Minnetonka, but I love Victoria and I plan to stay here for a long time. That was the plan. So I'm going to read the letter. I'm not going to read every single word of it because I know you have already seen it, but I'll go through it as fast as I can. Met with Deb McMillan last Monday, and I had 4 points with her. First, and by the way, this is in regards to 6315 Smithtown Road. It's a permit that you have approved to build a structure on this property. Also, by the way, this property is about 1.5 acres, and it is the property that's immediately next door to me. Okay, first, and I got it. These are just my opinions, but I'm gonna be direct with them. First, I don't believe they applied the setback requirements to the location of the building. I believe they interpret setbacks as a minimum requirement with no consideration for the position of neighboring homes, existing neighboring homes. The address is Smithtown Road, so the position should be relative to the other buildings that have addresses on Smithtown Road. Second, they did not apply any standard to the size of the garage, which appears to be capable of holding 27 cars. And I want to go into that a little bit more. But the garage alone is 6,000 square feet. The length of the garage is 152 feet. It'll have 8 double glass garage doors on the one side that faces my property. The garages will probably have bright lighting. Fluorescent lighting doesn't really matter. It'll be bright lighting, it'll be on all the time, and it's gonna light up virtually my entire home. Your own ordinance 447Z716-1 limits the size of detached garages to 900 feet. Detached garage is defined as, this is your own code, not attached to a principal use by a common vertical wall. A breezeway is not a common vertical wall, as understood by anyone who's ever bought a home. In fact, there's a driveway that wraps around nearly the entire garage, indicating that it's not attached, and that it's a carport of some type that the cars pass through. It's also relevant to the lights of these cars. Regardless, the essence of the code provides approximate guidance for the size of the attached garages. The city, I think, believes that an attached garage may be unlimited in size. Section 1810 regarding accessory structures, an accessory structure may be a maximum of 900 square feet and not consume greater than 10% of the buildable yard. The intent is to demonstrate reasonable garage size. Third, the city made no effort to minimize the impact of the neighborhood. There's no buffer zone, there's no screening, there's no consideration for the headlights of these cars. Fourth, most importantly, this is not a single-family home. You can't define it as anything other. Because it has a kitchen and beds, that doesn't do it. It's a car storage for a private club. It's violating the zoning ordinance. I'm going to skip the rest of that.
Can you wrap it up here?
What's that?
Your time is up. Can you wrap it up for us, please?
Yeah. What I'm asking you to do is to revoke the permit, ask him to redraw the building. I'd like you to ask him to have some consideration for the neighborhood, to allow the neighborhood to meet with him, go through this stuff like adults, and work something out. You know, I'm a big believer that people should use their property and have their own property rights, but we live in a city. We have neighbors, and people have to be reasonable with this stuff. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Keppel. Any comments, questions from the council? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Keppel.
All right, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda and not in application form? Seeing no one, we'll move on. Next is our consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are routine administrative, do not require deliberation, or are housekeeping items that are required by law. Consent agenda items are approved with one vote unless someone requests an item to be considered separately. Ms. Hardy, does staff wish to pull any consent agenda items for separate discussion and vote?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Is there a member of the council who would like to see anything pulled from the consent agenda, or anyone in the audience that wishes to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I will take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to adopt the consent agenda.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're now moving on to our regular agenda. The first and only item on the regular agenda is 6.1, which is a review of the proposed cannabis ordinance. Presenting this evening is our Associate Planner, Travis Brierly. Mr. Brierly, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we will be talking about the proposed cannabis ordinance. This is based on a model ordinance provided from the League of Minnesota Cities. A little background on how we got to where we are. We had the state legislature decriminalize and legalize marijuana cannabis and cannabis products back in 2023. We did conduct a public hearing on the proposed ordinance with the Planning Commission on November 19th. And today, we're just going over a draft to see if there's any final changes or some final comments from the City Council before bringing back a final ordinance for consideration on December 9th. One thing I would like to note, OCM, which the Office of Cannabis Management has not finalized their rules yet. That won't be finalized until at least January, so there could be some potential changes coming in the layout and some of the language within the ordinance itself.
Mr. Briley, on that note, and maybe Bob, you can weigh in on this too, does it behoove us to maybe hang on to this ordinance until after January to approve it once we hear back from the rulemaking, or is it better to adopt the ordinance and then make the adjustments based on rulemaking?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please.
The ordinance that's being presented is more of a baseline, so that when there could be the potential for issuing of cannabis business licenses, we have at least some regulations in place to protect the location of where they go. And we're just basically looking at a general time, place, and manner. Staff is working to figure out what the final steps we're going to have to do coming in January. And we've been reaching out to OCM. Haven't been getting a whole lot of information coming from them, but we're working on it. But the ordinance is in a good position where we feel there's good regulation in place. It's more the performance standards for some of the other types of businesses outside of retail are probably the biggest things that we're looking at.
Okay, very good.
And Mayor, if I can just,
Yeah, please.
I can't pass the invitation to be able to weigh in, of course. For the odd reason that I'll explain in a second, I agree totally with staff. The odd reason is that, as you may have heard, I mean, it's new news as of today or yesterday. There's a lawsuit now that's been filed against the state, the office that we're talking about, in relation to the early pre-issuance of social equity, what's called social equity licenses. There's a lawsuit now that's enjoined, stopped, prevented the agency from moving forward with that. And sort of the way that's going to play out and the implication of that lawsuit on their ability to issue other licenses is unclear. And so it's doubly now unclear how this is all going to get rolled out. But I think for the reasons staff states, sort of having something in place, given that we can't control when the rules become effective and when things start moving forward, I'd hate to see the state suddenly start moving forward and you not to have anything in place. So given the uncertainty, I think having some baseline in place is a sensible place to start.
All right, very good, thank you. All right, carry on.
Mayor and Council, just a reminder, the role of the Office of Cannabis Management, or OCM, their primary role is to govern the applications and licensing of cannabis businesses. They'll also handle inspections as well as quality control and things like that. The specific role of the city is to affect the time, place, and manner for cannabis business operations. To do that, it's an adoption of a new section of our zoning code. And then we'll be looking to update and amend the zoning code with potential changes, definitions, as well as moving things into the use tables as we go through and updating our zoning code in its entirety. We'll also look at those performance standards as well. By law, we are required to have at least one retail cannabis business, and we cannot prohibit the list of cannabis businesses by statute. So just looking as a reminder for what individuals are allowed to do, there are possession limits. So you can have 2 ounces of cannabis flower and cannabis products in your pocket. There's limits on what you can have for concentrates. Consumption is 21 and cannot be done publicly. So it'd be the same as similar to if you walk around with alcohol, you can't have that on a public street without getting a temporary event permit, which would permit that. There's home cultivation. With that, the plants must be secured, so not just anybody can get to them. You can do home extraction, so there might be some smells generated in residential areas from individuals performing these, and staff will deal with those as they come forward, if they come forward. And then it's still illegal to purchase cannabis products without going through a licensed retailer. When we look at the law, or when we look at the businesses at a high glance, the advertising is no person under 21, so we can't stick a sign in front of the elementary school or the high school and advertise for it. They also have to be labeled for safety of the products, and there's no advertising allowed on billboards. There's tracking systems put in place that OCM will manage. There's testing, which OCM will manage. There's home delivery, so there could be people driving around door dashing cannabis products. And then there's also a cannabis tax, which is charged on the gross. The reason I bring this up is that underneath the statute, there's a 10% tax. 80% of that collection will go to the state's general fund. The remaining 20% gets split between the county and the city. The end result is it's a 1% of that tax or the gross sales that the city would get as revenue. It's still unclear to exactly what we need to do with those finances, but if a business does $500,000 in sales, it's only $5,000 that would come to the city. So we are working on figuring out exactly how that process would work. Just some other information that will be discussed tonight. The Carver County ordinance was passed that if the city wants to grant retail registration authority to the county has set the limit for the city of Victoria at 2 registrations. That's 2 for Victoria, and then it's 10 for the entire county. So if the county gets to 10 and we don't have any, then they wouldn't be able to go ahead with another one. The way that we could affect change into that limit or into the rules that they set is that we would amend our ordinance and expand it similar to what Waconia did, as they're not planning to go underneath the counties or delegate the authority to the county. OCM rules, like I said, will be finalized in the winter and the spring. Right now, there is a draft on the website, and currently for retail permits being issued, they're looking at 150, with roughly half being the social equity applicants that could start applying back in July. We're not, according to different people, including OCM, it looks like we probably wouldn't see a retail permit application be submitted to the city until the early part of spring, so probably around the March timeframe. That's not to say that they couldn't get everything done and get things moving quicker, or that it would be slower. It's just a general idea to when they plan on getting it done.
So just to clarify that, the state has to allow them, or there's 2 permits granted, one at the state level and one at the city level?
Madam Mayor, the process will work where the applicants will apply through OCM, and then that application, we have to verify the zoning as a city and our regulations. And then once we sign off, they can submit it back to OCM and get approval. So all those issuance are. If we delegate the authority to the county would reach out to us to do the same thing.
Okay.
And Mayor, if I can just interject as we move on to the next slide. It's a really unique, frankly, odd is the wrong word, but odd, I'm going to use the word, relationship between the state and cities, where the cities confirm registrations, confirm the legality of various locations, and yet the state is the issuer of the license. I can't think of another, that's not true in liquor licensing or in tobacco or in other things that are highly regulated. So this is a new world, and you can expect that there's going to be some bumps and dips as we figure out how that's going to work. But essentially staff is laying that out correctly, that there is a role for us, even if we delegate to the county to be our registrating authority. There's a role for us, and we'll work with the state on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor and Council, just a couple quick statute references for anybody who wants to go back and take a look more in depth. Big question has come up is the open and public use of cannabis and cannabis products. Anything that creates a vapor, any type of smoke, cannot be used publicly. It can't be used inside a public place, can't be used on the street. That would include our parks and things like that. If the city was to issue a temporary event permit, then that can be bypassed outside. There's very specific rules for that I'll get into later in the presentation. But if somebody wants to use cannabis and cannabis flowers within their private residence, they're welcome to do so, as well as on their property, they're welcome to do so. We also look at, when you're looking at the personal use and possession, like I said, that's under statute, so it's home cultivation, concentration, and strength is listed in the OCM rules as far as how strong and how strong a product can be. There's recently some issues that have come up in the paper regarding a business in Minneapolis and the strength of their products. We want to make sure that we're not getting into that realm of regulation. We leave that to OCM to manage, as they are the experts. Temporary.
Question for you.
Yes, Councilmember.
So let's say, for instance, that we had somebody who wanted to rent a downtown location from one of the landowners and put in a cannabis smoking den, and then there would be a high concentration of odors. Would our nuisance ordinances and noxious fumes then be something that could subject such a location to be preventing a public nuisance, and we'd have enforcement through that?
Councilmember, that is a great question. The only way that that would be allowed is one, that it's not indoors. The statute does allow for an indoor permit, but the temporary event permit does not allow us to permit it inside. This is some of the things that are a little unclear and we finalized in the rules. When they come, we'll have better guidance on. But if we were to issue a temporary event permit, the city has the right to choose that time, place, and manner, and we can say that it needs to be set back far enough that those odors that can be produced don't affect people who aren't attending the event. Is there 100% that we'll get that right on the first permit? If we get a permit application, no, but we're going to do our best to make sure that happens and regulate that. The statute specifically states that you're prohibited from everywhere except places that are not generally accessed by the public. So there's two components. There's the component of the open use, and then there's the event permit, which our event permit is an outdoor permit.
Okay, so I understand the event permit, that's an outdoor,
Okay.
and that where it sounds like we want to land is to be able to, for lack of a better expression, quarantine that activity off in a place where we reasonably believe that it doesn't create too much of a disturbance for other people who are attending the event that aren't necessarily partaking. I think I was going to, like, if we have a business that wants to be established for the purpose of, a place to, for lack of a better expression, light up, or use some other method of burning, essentially. I mean, would we have an ability to say, hey, there's too much emission of the byproducts of this, and similar to, say, like somebody who paints automobiles and has volatile organic chemicals being emitted into the atmosphere outside of that business, do we have a reasonable belief that those ordinances that enforce that kind of activity could be extended to this?
Council member, to that point, the Minnesota Clean Indoor Act prohibits smoking inside. That was amended once the cannabis was legalized back in 2023. So you still wouldn't be able to smoke anything that vaporizes or lights on fire at the mechanic shop, or if someone wanted to create a smoking lounge. A summary that was put up by the Department of Health in reference to the update specifically states that smoking lounges are a prohibited activity. There is some language that was written into the statute that allows for a smoking lounge permit for cannabis, but OCM doesn't have a method in place at this time for any types of issuance. So it is something that we're looking into. And I do apologize, I can't give a complete answer on it just because there is some conflicting information that's in the state, but we have reached out to OCM for some clarification.
Okay, understood. I mean, we have had some residents that have had some concerns and questions. Just trying to get that out for awareness for us to be thinking through these kind of.
Yeah, and if I may, Councilmember, since we have good relationships with our businesses, I would think that, if a complaint came in, we'd be able to talk to them, and then we would have the authority to bring either in the county and or OCM to control that odor if there was issues. I have a feeling it will happen at some point. I mean, you might even smell it walking down the street, but we just have to be really cautious of how we approach the business when it comes to smells and such, because we currently really don't do that. But we could have something in place to where we can chat with those types of businesses.
Okay, thanks.
Kind of along that same line, you mentioned that, so, we have I've heard cigar clubs and those kinds of things where you can smoke your cigars indoors, and the indoor, they're getting around that act somehow. Could that happen as well with cannabis?
Mayor, there's not a clear answer for the cannabis piece. As far as the tobacco piece, there's specific rules that are in place that have been set with inside the statute, as well as the rules governing that statute. I've only read minimal on what it is in relation to cannabis, but I do know that there are some things that can be done, and there's some ways to get around the rules and the laws that are in place. If something like that was to happen, that would be up to either law enforcement or to OCM or state authorities to handle that regulation for us.
Okay.
If it does become an issue and violates our nuisance codes or anything like that, then we would try to handle as much as we can until we need to delegate that authority out.
Very good. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, just to point out, the main things that we used when looking at the ordinance, besides working with other state agencies, was the Office of Cannabis Management. We looked at the Minnesota Statutes 342, which is the statute for the cannabis products as well as hemp products and alike. And then there's also the rules that have been put out by OCM. These are the direct links to those documents for anybody who's interested in looking further. Tonight, the whole purpose of the night is to take a look at the proposed ordinance, which we had a public hearing on. It is a shorter ordinance for us, which, like I mentioned, we will be expanding in the future and making some changes to. The first thing that we're looking at is just the definitions. In the draft ordinance, or in the proposed ordinance that was sent out with the packet, there's a limited list of definitions. Those definitions came from OCM and are recommended to be placed in our ordinance, so we did. And those are in addition to the definitions listed in the statute. The other part is administration, basically granting us the authority to do what we're doing from the state statute and just kind of taking care of the legal piece. Underneath the administration as well, it's written in there that under paragraph C that we will be delegating the registration authority for cannabis retail registration to Carver County. The nice thing with this is if there's ever an issue that we have that comes up with Carver County, what we could do is we take a look at our ordinance and we can amend our ordinance to take back that authority, or we would work at the staff level as much as possible to get some type of agreement in place to stick with the community standard. Registration, there is a consent that is required, and that'll be part of the application process that the city attorney had pointed out that it's kind of weird because it's the only application that we have through state regulation where we need to verify the zoning, we need to verify the rules and everything else put in place for the business. The big part of the ordinance and our biggest regulatory part that we have is looking at the hours of operation. What we did is we looked to match the on and off sale. So if you have an on-sale liquor license, you'd be permitted for the sale during that licensing period. And if you do not have on-sale liquor, then you'd be restricted to the same hours that we have off-sale to. It just kind of keeps it simplified and keeps the businesses close together. One thing that we missed on this, and I'll say missed because it is accurate, but it would be a significant change, required another public hearing, is that right now the way it's written is that if you have a retail license and you have you have an on-sale license, you'd be able to sell the cannabis flower until that bar close time. So that's something that we will be looking at making a change to, and that's just part of the learning curve with this. Advertisements have to conform to our sign ordinance, and that's just time, place, and manner. It has nothing to do with what's displayed on the sign. It has everything to do with what type of sign it is, how it's built, how it's displayed on the property, and things like that. And state statute regulates most of that for us. And if we did have an issue with content or location, that's something that we would report to OCM and let them investigate and take care of on our behalf. The display of cannabis products, this is written in that if you are casually walking by a cannabis retail location, that if you won't see any cannabis products, you won't see any cannabis paraphernalia and things like that. It'll help keep the windows cleaner, and we do the same thing with tobacco generally is done, and same with liquor sales.
So just a clarification on that, is that signage, as you talked about signage or advertisement and then display of the products or anything visibly having the products in it. So a sign or a picture, light, whatever, with something on it, is that can that be in a window or not?
If Councilmember, if it is a sign for advertising for the business, we would look at the type of sign, the content of that sign.
Yeah.
If it's an image of a product.
Yeah.
Or if it's a caricature of a product, that wouldn't be something that I believe that would be comfortable in making a determination on, because that becomes subjective.
Got it.
And we don't want to get into that gray area and cause an issue. If we do get a business that has a retail license, we do want them to flourish. We want them to grow and be a part of the community.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. If a business wants to move from one part of the city to another part of the city, or even if it's just the property next door expansion, they would need to reconfirm the zoning and the regulations before we would permit that. If it was to happen, that'd be something else. We would reach out to us and let them take care of the investigation as well as a resolution for it. There are specific zoning districts that we're looking at with each of the business types, which are listed in front. There are 13 total licenses. The ones that aren't listed on here include a transporter, event organizer, delivery server, service, medical cannabis combination license. Those licenses we won't need to regulate by district because they'll be in conjunction with another license, or they won't have a physical building or structure inside the city. Micro businesses and meso businesses are basically, think of an apple farm where you can go and or an apple orchard, you can go pick the apples and you can purchase them on site. That's what those type of businesses are. So they're cultivation, manufacturing, and retail combined into one. So taking a look at the different areas where cannabis would be permitted in the city, include our CBD district, which is circled in red on the screen. That's primarily where we would want to look for retail, as well as the blue circle that's on the bottom of the map is our south growth area. That's going to be our C1 and C2 zoning. So our community and our neighborhood commercial districts. Those would be primarily focused at the retail component. In the green areas, that's our agricultural areas. That's where we would look at saying and allowing for cultivation and things of that nature. And some of the performance standards that we would look at for those are some of the things that we're examining going forward and waiting on final clarifications from the state. To put that in perspective, as far as agricultural, you'd be looking at the micro, meso, and the cultivator type of businesses. So just the growth of it, it's not product manufacturing or anything like that, so it would have same needs that a farm would. In our non-residential districts, this is separated out to say in the light industrial areas where you could do the cultivating and you could do your manufacturing piece, but we would want to keep retail out of that industrial area. Currently, our only industrial area that we have is on the west side of town, just west of Holiday. For that location, if somebody did want to do retail, it'd be something that we would want to bring back and get some community input just because of the changes to Highway 5. Traffic is a major concern for that area. And then we're looking at your retailer locations would be basically our downtown and our south growth area. We do have the temporary cannabis event permits that could be issued. The temporary event permits, we have 30 days to respond to, which is the same to any application for any cannabis business. I've highlighted in green the majority of where our CBD district is. So within our central business district is the only area we would permit a temporary event. That does not include any parks. Parks have their own zoning, so that is completely separate. The other thing that we do is we restrict the hours for Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and on Sundays from 11 to 6. One of the things that statute does allow us to do is revoke the permit for cause. If there are issues with how the event is going or with control or not following the rules that are listed in the statute, the city has the right to pull the permit and the event and not issue one going forward. I would like to point out when looking at a temporary event permit, someone like myself who doesn't have a cannabis business would not be able to apply for it without getting somebody who has a business license already. So there are specific rules. It's not just anybody can apply for it. There's certain details that have to be worked out, and there's two chapters in the statute that actually regulate all the rules with that. So it is very limited, and we can set setbacks. For an event, it'd be similar to if you have an alcohol or an event with alcohol and you have a beer tent, there's got to be a fence, there's got to be security, you got to make sure everybody's of age. And then we also want to look at to see if it creates any type of nuisances or if it creates any type of issues, and we'd want to restrict it to those areas. So within the city of Victoria, within this district, there's very few areas that staff can see that this type of event could happen, but we want to make sure that we at least make a space available, which would be on private property, and give that property owner the option.
Mr. Briley, if we think about like our Lions Pavilion, for instance, and we have an event there, and they oftentimes have a liquor license that goes with that. If they'd want to, if they had a licensed cannabis provider that would want to come in and sell alongside that liquor license, what does that look like? Is that permitted in that area or no, because it's a park?
Madam Mayor, it would not be permitted under the current language. If that is something that the council would like us to take a look at and possibly put into the proposed ordinance before we bring it back, we can definitely do that. Parks is a little bit different because there are minors, and in this case, minors, anybody under the age of 21. The statute requires that anything that gets vaporized is away from people who are 21. The advertising is in focus. And one of the concerns staff would have is that if the park's being used by minors and there's an advertisement for the business that's there, does that create a conflict, and are we permitting an illegal activity to take place?
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting conundrum, I think, but because our Lions Pavilion does host those events, but it is in a park, I don't think we want to allow it, but all right, moving on, I guess.
No, I mean, just on that matter, I mean, I concur that it is a park,
Yeah.
even though the Lions Pavilion is in the park. I think
The park
the overarching governing
trumps.
concept is that it's a park, and we don't want that activity to take place in a park. Now, it does sort of point out that if the Amira project does come online, then in that community, they can certainly, because they're in the central business district, have at having a temporary event. And that would, I think, be something.
What about though, and sorry if you said this, but you know, I think we've talked a lot about vaporized, right? So smoke and that stuff, but right, like there's drinks as well, right? And we already have a liquor, we allow liquor there. So if it was for cannabis drinks, like can you limit it? Do you mean it to me that we're already doing, if you can have beer or whatever, if you have cannabis drinks, what's the difference between those two? I understand, I totally understand the smoking part, but like, or even if it's
Good point.
Can we narrow that so that like drinks would be allowed, but not anything that's dealing with smoke?
Councilmember, that's a great question. What you're referring to is it falls underneath the low potency hemp edibles is where the drinks come from. That's a separate regulation from the flower, and that can actually be issued as a separate license from the retail flower license. So currently right now in the state of Minnesota, you can sell those low potency hemp products, including the drinks, or if you get the gummy bears or the brownies or what have you. So that's a little bit different. I don't know the specifics on exactly how those attach to a liquor license, but I do know that to be able to sell the canned drinks, you need to have a liquor license at a minimum. And then I don't have the specifics, but I'd be more than happy to look them up and get back to you.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to know. I think we should know that.
Mayor, Council, would you have any other questions on the event permit or the regulations before we move on?
like we're moving on.
So the last section that we've written up is the enforcement part. It's important to note that the city is responsible for the enforcement of and administration of our city ordinances and the code in general. We can delegate authority to other agencies. With the registration, this ordinance would delegate that registration to the county. And then we also can contract with the Sheriff's Department for law enforcement throughout the city. So they'd be in charge of that type of enforcement when it comes to open use or when it comes to any type of nuisance that might be created from that. What the city's not responsible for, we're not responsible for enforcing OCM rules. A year ago, OCM was looking at having the city enforce their rules, found out that that's very difficult and there's a lot of pushback, so OCM's taking on that responsibility for us. We're not responsible for product testing, and we're not responsible for the quality control of any products that are done. OCM or the market will dictate if those type of businesses or those type of products would be able to survive. Are there any questions or comments on anything that we covered or anything that we haven't covered that I can research and bring back?
Okay, very good. Council, nicely done. I know this is uncharted territory, so nicely done from staff on that. Council, any questions? Let me ask this question first. Is there anything from you that you would like direction from us on?
Madam Mayor, not at this time for the direction. One thing that I haven't stated when we're looking at doing an update and setting the different standards is looking at potentially moving these out of the zoning code and the municipal side. Staff is working on the zoning code as well as looking at cleaning up different parts of the municipal side of the code. So there'll be some things done. So any changes that would need to be made in the future, there will be a mechanism in place for us to do that. And it is planned by staff to come forward within a few months to half a year. It all kind of depends on how things shift out and what OCM does.
Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you. Council, any questions, comments, further discussion on this topic? All right. Thank you very much again for that great report and the update on that. This was just an item for feedback and discussion, so there are no more items on our regular agenda this evening. So we'll move on to reports and emerging issues. Ms. Hardy, first up, anything from staff?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Vos, anything from the legal end of things?
You know, Mayor, Council's aware that there are a number of legal things that I'm working on, nothing that needs to be reported to you at this point. I'd missed your last council meeting, and so I didn't sort of get to bask in the glow along with you on the completed sale of the land in relation to Downtown West. That is something that I just want to at least say out loud. Your staff did a great job. We managed to get that closed. It was a little complicated, but that got across the goal line, and obviously that's been something that's been in the works for a decade or so or more, Mayor, and so that's a really good development for the city. So just want to make that note.
Very good, thanks, we agree. All right, anything from council this evening? All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion, can I get a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? We stand adjourned.